we find ourselves caught and like really stuck in this, like, especially like a self-flagellatory or like self-shaming kind of place, it's important to be aware of that and to try to interrupt that cycle in some way. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey, I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today we are talking about feelings because I've gotten a lot of questions about what it actually looks like to feel your feelings rather than intellectualize your feelings. For those of you who don't know, this is the subject of a lot of discourse in the therapy part of the internet, especially because when folks go to therapy, usually some of the first things that we're learning are that we're not actually like effectively feeling our feelings so much as we are thinking about them or dwelling on them or like kind of getting stuck with them. And so the question becomes like, how do we combat this, right? And I want to be super clear, first and foremost, the content in this video and on this channel generally is intended to be broad strokes education and learning. This is not therapy, cannot be therapy. However, there are always links in the description for you to find a therapist of your very own if you'd like one. That said, I want to give some broad strokes learning today about the difference between intellectualizing our feelings or like thinking about our feelings rather than actually feeling them, and how to kind of deal with that, how to address that. So let's get into that. Okay, let's get into tip number one, which first and foremost is to be realistic about your capabilities. Oftentimes when we embark upon the journey of actually feeling our feelings rather than thinking about them or intellectualizing them, it can feel really frustrating. And I want to encourage people to be kind to themselves about this because, especially knowing that we live in a world that shames people, that disadvantages us in terms of our ability to effectively do this, this is a very common issue, right? The advice that I give clients a lot is to remember how long you've been doing the intellectualizing your feelings thing and to help put that into perspective, right? It is simply an unrealistic expectation that you will watch this video, for example, and after a lifetime of intellectualizing your feelings, just be able to feel them in like the proper way. That's not how it works. So first of all, be nice to yourself about that, and also to embrace this journey with that energy. It is in fact a journey. It's also a thing that we will continue to do learning and grow a greater understanding of throughout our lifespan. So when we embark upon this journey, it's just important to have an attitude of like patience and like long-term success rather than trying to force ourselves to do the thing just because we want to do the thing. Tip number two is to get grounded in your body, like your actual physical body yourself. Part of the issue with intellectualizing our feelings is that we oftentimes are very preoccupied with the stories that we're telling ourselves, with memories that come up, with the things that we say to and about ourselves, and that's all a barrier when we talk about actually feeling your feelings. The thing that's important to remember with this topic is that usually emotions have a physical counterpart. Emotions are felt in the body in the same way that physical sensations are. This is why therapists ask you these terribly cliche questions about where do you feel that in your body, because this is like a real thing. It's very helpful for us to get in touch with what the physical sensations are that oftentimes accompany your emotions. Just as a friendly reminder, again, this will all be different for every person. There's some like generally agreed upon commonalities, I guess, but the work here is in figuring out what comes up for you specifically in regards to particular emotions. And we will be able to do this so much more effectively if you're actually grounded in your body. So completing some basic meditation to make sure that you're aware of like the feeling of your butt in the chair, your feet on the floor, the clothes on your body, the breath in your lungs. All of this is useful work to be doing because the more attuned that we become to our physical selves, the more adept we are at grounding ourselves in our physical selves, the easier it will be for us to recognize what our bodily sensations are when we're talking about feeling our feelings. I also want to pause here to be super clear that this is work that ideally we're doing with a clinician, right? Like the actual processing of like, what does this feel like? How do I get grounded in my body? These are all very much skills that therapists can help you specifically develop and address and work through in real time. So again, I'm always going to plug the links in the description for you guys to go find a therapist because this is work, again, that's ideally guided in a very specific, very intentional way that is tailored and customized to you. However, that brings us to tip number 3, which is to be aware of what the stories are that you are telling yourself. I mentioned this briefly at the top, but when we intellectualize our feelings, oftentimes we get stuck in this place where we're telling ourselves a story or we're repeating this inner monologue to ourselves about like the greater meaning of these feelings, right? We generally as a culture have a really hard time just accepting our feelings as feelings rather than being sort of symbolic of a larger meaning, right? If we feel afraid, for example, oftentimes the story that we tell ourselves is that fear is a sign of weakness. This is a thing to be ashamed of, or this is not a good enough thing to be afraid of, and so therefore I'm being dramatic, et cetera, right? These are all things that cause us to get lost up here rather than actually feeling the fear and validating that as like a very normal reaction to life generally, really. And so being aware of those stories and doing work with your own therapist to combat those, to address like, where did these come from? Where did I learn this? Is this serving me anymore? How can I challenge the story that I'm telling myself? And instead practice resonating with a story or a value or a statement in my inner monologue that better reflects my actual beliefs, values, and beliefs. And so again, this is all work that ideally you're doing with a therapist or somebody who's like licensed and credentialed to help you work through that. But for the purpose of helping folks understand what we mean when we say you're intellectualizing your feelings rather than feeling them, this is very much a thing that gets in your way. So recognizing that there's probably a story that you're telling yourself and working with your therapist to figure out what is it, how can I combat that, where did this come from, et cetera, et cetera. This is all helpful work to kind of move that journey along. Number 4 is a little bit more of a practical one. I want to encourage folks to be aware of at what point you lose it. What I mean when I say this is that oftentimes for folks who have done a little bit of work around this, we'll find that we have like a moment, like a brief glimpse of success, of really feeling the feeling, and then it's gone. And it's really, really frustrating to get to this place. But notice, where did you go? Like at what point in this journey of feeling your feelings did you start to like essentially dissociate from your body? And again, this is all work that's really important and helpful to do with a therapist, because you guys can kind of address like, okay, I lost it at this particular point, or like the story came back when I started to really deeply feel the emotion, et cetera, et cetera. This is all important work for us to be doing and like noticing. But even if you're doing this in a self-guided way, if you're just kind of generally trying to improve your ability to do this, noticing at what point your brain took over from feeling and started causing you to think or to intellectualize again can be a window into what particular sensitivities we have. Oftentimes this happens for folks when we start to really deeply feel the emotions. There's a feeling of fear. But again, this is the point at which the question of like, what stories are you telling yourself becomes very relevant. Because if you have like, for example, this is a very garden variety example. This happens to lots of people. But if you have a feeling of fear about deeply, deeply feeling the emotions because what if I can't come back from feeling that emotion? That's an important story for us to address. And then we can develop like some safety protocols, some practical skills, some community support around combating that fear and to helping you move through the journey of like really feeling the feeling, the emotion. You get it. Moving on. Tip number 5 is to try not to ruminate. There is a very key difference between sitting with our feelings, validating that those feelings are real, and sort of like getting lost, like choosing to stay stuck in the shit. Oftentimes this can be an act of like almost self-harm, where we're like dwelling. And again, this is a point at which you'll notice you've probably moved back into the thinking realm of things rather than feeling realm of things. If we find ourselves caught and like really stuck in this, like, especially like a self-flagellatory or like self-shaming kind of place, it's important to be aware of that and to try to interrupt that cycle in some way. In the same way that completely dissociating and avoiding our emotions altogether is not healthy, forcing yourself to stay stuck or to say really mean things to yourself to prolong this feeling of hurt because you feel like you deserve bad or uncomfortable emotions, that's not healthy or helpful to you either. So be mindful of trying not to get like lost or stuck or like in this ruminating place, because again, that's not helping you either and can also help to kind of reinforce this cycle of like, I feel something and so then I think about it, rather than I feel something and I allow myself to really feel it. This topic, even though it is kind of like a simple thing, it can be actually very complex to work out the particulars of this with you as an individual. So again, I want to be super clear. If you're having a really, really hard time with this, it may be very impactful for you to work with a clinician, particularly somebody who specializes in like a somatic, like body-centered type of therapy. There are links in my description for you that will help you narrow down what I'm talking about in terms of like bimodality. But I do just very much want to plug the usefulness, the validity of therapy in this pursuit. But again, I think this is work that's entirely possible for folks to do, even if you're doing this in like a more self-guided way. So I hope that these are helpful to you guys. If you like the video, obviously like the video. If you want to subscribe to the channel, it does very much help support the work that we're doing here. And then you can share the video to help the channel grow and help each other grow, and I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.